Usually she's here, so it should be straight. Howdy, ma'am.
After the budget is. I will work remotely.
Chair Krantz, can you hear me, sir?
Yes, sir.
Chair
hear me?
Krantz, can you hear me, sir?
Yes, sir. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Thank you very much.
Hi, Tony. Can you hear me?
And loud and clear.
Okay, thank you.
Anthony, it looks like we have a quorum, but we could wait a few minutes for more.
That is correct, sir.
We shall do that.
We do have a quorum, sir, if you want to get started.
Okay, let's give it one more minute.
Yes, sir.
Okay. I would like to call to order the regular board meeting of the North County Transit District for June 17th, 2021. It is now 2:01 p.m. Anthony Flores, clerk of the board, please call the roll.
Yes, sir. Board Member Sanchez. Board Chair Krantz.
Here.
Board Member Contreras.
Present.
Board Member McNamara.
Here.
Board Member Desmond. Board Member Quirk.
Here.
Board Vice Chair Edson.
Present.
Board Member Jenkins.
Here.
Board Member Bapatal.
Here.
And Board Member Von Mupert.
That is the roll, sir.
Okay, thank you. And if you'd please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
Right.
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Now Anthony will provide a safety briefing and review evacuation procedures.
Yes, sir. In the event of an emergency, I'll dial 911. In the event of an evacuation, please exit the building using the stairs. Do not use the elevator. Once clear of the building, do not re-enter unless told to do so by emergency personnel. We have fire extinguishers and fire alarms located on each floor of this building. We also have a portable defibrillator located on the first floor and staff on hand trained on CPR procedures. That concludes my safety brief, sir.
Thank you. And Anthony, are there any changes to the agenda?
No changes to the agenda, sir, but I did want to note there was an update to agenda item 2 staff report, set public hearing and authorized staff to receive public comment related to the expansion of coaster service. The staff report was revised to include the proposed increase in Friday service from 22 daily trips in the winter and 26 daily trips in the summer to 32 daily trips year round.
Okay, thank you. Board Member Quirk, do you have a question?
I do see that items number 1, 2, and 3 are on the consent calendar. I just had a couple of comments. They should be pretty brief for each of them. Is there a way to address those?
Yeah, when we move into that section, which is what we are doing right now, we have the minutes and the regular board meetings of May 2021 and consent items 1 through 11. And I will entertain a motion to approve those items. And Mr. Quirk, if you want to comment, you can now.
I'll make a motion to approve. Jenkins?
And I'll second that.
Okay. Julie, your mic was muted.
Thanks, sorry.
Go ahead, Dan.
Okay, great. So as far as agenda item 1, we've got the operational statistics for the various services. And I think back in January or February, I had asked about, approving various spending, particularly on the coaster, because that's getting, a lot of infrastructure and capital spending, trying to understand what's the benefit of this spending in light of ridership and what our forecasts are. And we got forecasts, a couple of months ago through the marketing subcommittee that showed flatline. We have some updated forecasts that I've seen in our budget discussion that talks about potentially getting to, I think, 75% of pre-COVID levels by the end of 2022. But I just want to kind of bring it up as a general observation that ridership levels are incredibly low. This is nationwide. We've seen volumes on highways get almost back to normal. So I'm concerned that there's a lot of spending that we're proving potentially today and in the future on the train, the coaster specifically, without really understanding what's the benefit. And Anthony, I don't know if you can pull up the April monthly ridership numbers, but just to show, where they are.
Well, generally, we wouldn't get that deep into it unless we actually pulled it off consent. So maybe
I can speak to it. The numbers are down 84% from target. It's averaging about 500 total people per day for a 41-mile line. And, a lot of the data that I'm seeing is that numbers are coming back very, very slowly and, may never get to pre-pandemic levels. And the pre-pandemic levels weren't high to begin with. So, we're contemplating spending hundreds of millions or billions of dollars, on the coaster without really adequately understanding what the potential ridership is. So I am very concerned about voting for spending without understanding that. And are we voting to spend money on something that has very, very little public benefit? I understand it's not an action item today, but I do just want to highlight it as something that I hope all of the board members are also looking at.
Okay,
So that
no.
was okay. So that was the first one. The second one, it's kind of a question. I know we're setting a public hearing for the coaster service expansion. My understanding is that that will be for July 22nd. So is that the better, opportunity to, talk about what that expansion means? Again, similar type of theme. We're expanding service, but is anyone going to actually ride it? And there's a lot of money involved with expanding service, and then it leads into the third level, which is spending a lot of money on the double tracking and the platform for the fairgrounds. Again, spending a lot of money, and I have very, very little confidence that this is actually going to result in improved ridership and overall benefits to society as far as transportation. So, all three of those items are kind of related in my mind, but just wanted to make those observations to the board and the public. So
Okay, thank you. Noted. And yes, item 2, setting the public hearing. It seems like July's meeting will be an opportunity for you to highlight your concerns. So
Okay,
Anthony, I think we're ready to vote.
On the combined motion of Board Member Jenkins, seconded by Board Member Quirk, to approve the minutes of the regular board meeting held on May 20th, 2021, and consent items 1 through 11. Board Member Bapatal, how do you vote?
Aye.
Board Member Quirk? I'm sorry, Board Member Quirk, I think you're on mute.
Yes.
Thank you, sir. Board Chair Krantz?
Yes.
Board Member McNamara?
Yes.
Board Member Sanchez? Board Member Desmond? Board Member Jenkins?
Yes.
Board Vice Chair Edson?
Yes.
Board Member Contreras?
Aye.
On the combined motion of Board Member Jenkins, seconded by Board Member Quirk, to approve the minutes of the regular board meeting held on May 20th, 2021, and consent items 1 through 11, motion passes with all board members present voting yes, with the exception of Board Member Sanchez and Board Member Desmond absent.
Okay, thank you. We have 3 other business items to discuss today, and item number 12, Katie Persons, the Senior Strategic Planner, will review this item. And it is asking, it supports the board providing feedback and questions to Sandag related to the draft 2021 Regional Transportation Plan. And I had asked the executive director to schedule a follow-up agenda item for July so that the board can consider adopting NCTD priorities ahead of Sandag's closing public comments on the draft RTP. So keep that in mind as we hear from Katie.
Good afternoon. Thank you. I'll say at the top that more than anything, this presentation serves to outline the framework in which NCTD staff is reviewing the draft regional plan and to point to some specific discussions that we think would be valuable during our review. So the regional plan is an important housing, land use, and transportation plan that provides a 30-year framework for the region and is updated every 4 years. The regional plan combines the regional transportation plan, the sustainable community strategy, and the regional comprehensive plan, and it must comply with specific state and federal mandates related to greenhouse gas emission reduction, federal civil rights requirements, environmental justice considerations, air quality conformity, and a public participation process. The regional plan also informs other planning and programming activities, including which projects are funded under the Regional Transportation Improvement Program and the Transnet program. The regional plan was developed within the framework of the 5 big moves, which includes complete corridors, transit leap, mobility hubs, flexible fleets, and Next OS, or operating system. Transit leap is of particular importance to the district, but all of the moves are interrelated and thus relevant to NCTD. Transit leap is focused on fast and flexible transit, with new and or expanded transit services referenced within the regional plan. The map on this slide on the right shows the 2050 transit network envisioned in the regional plan, which includes modes such as commuter rail, light rail, next-gen rapid bus, local bus, high-speed rail, and an automated people mover serving the airports. So a quick schedule for adopting the 2021 regional plan. The draft regional plan was made available for public comment on May 28th, and the comment period will close on July 30th of this year. The next milestone is the draft environmental impact report, which will be released in the late summer or early fall for public review and comments. And then finally, the anticipated adoption of the final 2021 regional plan will occur in December of 2021. So on the screen here are some key considerations to keep in mind while reviewing the draft plan from the district's perspective. We want to know how well does it meet the needs of the transportation system and specifically NCTD's network? Would voters support increased taxes or fees to support the projects that are outlined in the plan? And does the plan prioritize no regret decisions by investing in projects that are effective and future ready from our perspective? So a brief overview of the questions that are attached to the staff report is on this slide. We understand that the information we're asking for is maybe a little bit in the weeds for a public-facing document, but we'd really like to dig in on the assumptions and projections on a project level basis, as well as a modal basis. We also want to confirm our understanding of the assumed funding sources at this stage and the assumed level of service for each transit mode. And then finally, we want to confirm our understanding of any potential impact to transit customers related to major projects included in the plan. This slide highlights some considerations related to fare subsidies, not necessarily an opinion on one side or the other, but elements to discuss as an agency and as a region. Candidly, the service frequency on our Breeze and Sprinter system is substandard. And one element worth considering is whether fare subsidies can or should come before meaningful improvements to service quality and reliability on our system. We can think of transportation burden in terms of financial cost to the customer, but we can also think of what transportation burden means when services are infrequent or unavailable to those who need it due to limited resources. And if the region ultimately decides to pursue fare subsidies in some form, we have key recommendations related to funding sources that are worth considering. That includes funding sources that are not sales tax based so that we don't have a single point of failure during times of economic downturn. And we don't want to find ourselves in a situation where service cuts are the only viable option to stay afloat. Next, we'll transition a little bit to discussing some of the major projects at a very high level. On the screen, the Central Mobility Hub is a project highlighted within the regional plan, and there is an ongoing comprehensive multimodal corridor planning effort associated with this project. A stronger connection to the San Diego International Airport has been a piece of consistent feedback from some groups within San Diego County. And within the regional plan, the Central Mobility Hub, The Central Mobility Hub is proposed on the Spaywar site located directly south of Old Town Station with an automated people mover included in the 2050 transit vision as the connecting mode to the airport. We wanted to highlight here on the map the importance of developing airport connections to Santa Fe Depot and the future Convention Center station, where there are existing transit centers or transit infrastructure and station footprints. And that's an example of an area where we think that investment would be a no regret move and ensure that those stations are also properly integrated within the broader system. There are also a few proposed projects along the Losan corridor envisioned within the regional plan. That includes the Del Mar Tunnel, the UTC or Miramar Tunnel, and the Sorrento Mesa Spur. And within the attachment to our staff report today, we requested some project-specific information related to the timing, the funding, and any discussion of analysis related to transit customer impact associated with those projects. So for next steps, we plan to have a follow-up board agenda item in July to allow the board to formally adopt NCTD's priorities as it relates to the regional plan, but wanted to designate this opportunity for general discussion. And with that, the next slide. The requested board action at this stage is to approve the submission of feedback and questions to Sandag regarding the draft 2021 regional transportation plan.
Okay. Thank you. Board Member Quirk.
Yeah, I'm gonna basically repeat some of my comments. I think the five big moves, the regional plan on the part of Sandag is incredibly flawed. And you only have to look at, my understanding is they want to put a lot of rail throughout the county. And you only have to look at the coaster operations to realize it's been a 25-year experiment for the coaster. There's been hundreds of millions of dollars spent on trying to improve and expand the service. I think it was a worthwhile effort, well-intentioned, but you look at the results even before COVID and they were, very bad. And now they're even worse in COVID, and you have all sorts of health concerns that are going to play into decisions to go on to mass transit in the future. Buses don't have, the required extra spending of that extra infrastructure. So that makes sense. So my main comment is that there needs to be a serious rethink of including rail as part of our 30-year plan, especially when we see significant technologies like self-driving electric vehicles that are going to start to become much more mainstream over the next probably 10 or 15 years. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Vice Chair Edson.
Yes, with regard to the matter before us, I think that these are really all good questions that staff has developed, and I look forward to receiving the answers from Sandag.
Okay. Thank you. Board Member Contreras.
Yeah, I just want to thank staff for putting together this list here with some of the questions that we definitely need answers for. I am really excited though that as a region we are looking seriously at youth opportunity passes. If we want to continue to grow our ridership, we definitely need to start at a younger age. And also that tends to be the demographic that doesn't have as much income to lean on. So I think that's great. I understand some of the hesitation around rail. However, just looking at the difference between the coaster and the sprinter's rail too. And the sprinter's been doing great. I'm excited to see how we're going to move forward as a community and as a region to make sure that we integrate different parts of our community together. I definitely think that a holistic view is needed, but those youth opportunity passes, that discussion is critical, and we do need to figure out, one, how to make it viable, not just in the short term, but in the long term. So I appreciate the questions that we're asking of Sandag to get a little bit more information on that. But I do, I don't know if there's an answer for this, but the last time we discussed youth opportunity passes, there was a comment made by our executive director that there's legislation that would either be prohibiting us from moving that direction, or that we would need an update on in order to move towards youth opportunity passes. But I don't see that as part of the question packet. So can anyone elaborate on, that piece of that was a prior concern when this discussion was before us?
This is Matt. So yes, so this was also raised. I think I raised this at the Transportation Committee, that as state law is currently written with the performance metrics generated around fare box recovery, that if we were to do this, it could have a detrimental impact on all of those performance indicators, which serves as a basis for allocation of funding. That is something that has been discussed. It's not something necessarily that would be addressed in terms of Sandag's RTP, but it would be addressed as part of Sandag's and NCTD's legislative agenda on an annual basis, if that's the path that, from a policy perspective, folks want to move towards.
So that concern is specifically around recapturing of dollars that are lost because the rider would be essentially subsidized in a different way.
Yeah. So the example I gave was we offered discounts using low carbon transit operations program funds on the Sprinter. That ended up having a detrimental impact on fare box recovery because those dollars paid into that were not customer revenue dollars, as an example.
Okay. And in your conversations, does this seem to, be a concern that's shared by Sandag? And just because I don't really see it coming up so often, but it seems like it could be a major concern. So there is a little bit of confusion on my part as to, why I don't see that in our question packet and why I don't necessarily hear that as a concern when this topic comes up for discussion outside of this body.
So it's not addressed in terms of a question to Sandag because it's a legislative matter, not something that's included in the RTP. So that's the reason it's not there.
Okay.
This is actively being discussed at the state and at the California Transit Association. And I know it's being considered, but at this point in time, it's just being considered. Right now, the primary focus for everyone is navigating this COVID recovery. I know there's lots of discussions at the state level about looking at different ways to offer reduced fares, whether it be through pilot programs or through dedicated sources of funds in the future. So the reason you're not seeing it as part of the RTP, because again, it is a legislative matter.
Okay.
From the other perspective of it, again, I can provide you some of the information that's going on at the California Transit Association and within the legislative bodies related to that discussion about those matters. We've offered feedback before. I think if you recall at our last presentation from Richard Harmon, we have actually proposed language to make a legislative change so that if you were to do something like that, you would be able to have the credit commensurate to a customer fare.
Right. Yeah, that seems to be a critical point for this to even function in the future. And just to clarify, Mr. Tucker, this is simply state, an issue at the state, or is it an issue at the state and the federal level?
It's an issue primarily at the state level because it's tied to funding that we receive.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. You answering that question for me. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Okay, Vice Chair Edson.
Yes, excuse me if I'm going into the weeds here, but I have a question for staff. So we have only recently gone to pre-COVID operations. And I sit on a committee, the Community and Government Relations Committee with the Del Mar Fairgrounds and the City of Del Mar and representatives from our state leaders' offices. And in that meeting, I heard that there has been a huge upswing in NCTD fare trippers. Over 1,000 had been sold as of Monday, which equals their second highest year on record for NCTD fare tripper passes. And so they're actually pretty excited, thinking that they may actually, 2016 is the highest year on record. And so that they're hoping that the sales will continue to go up and to meet that record. How overall, in addition to or not counting those fair tripper passes, how is our performance just these last few weeks that we've been open for business as usual?
Well, I think we're seeing gradual improvement over time. And I think, again, as we reach additional milestones in terms of recovery, we feel confident that we're going to see more and more riders return. I think, Board Member Edson, our perspective is a little bit longer term. I think I listened to Board Member Quirk's comments, and I just want to actually gives me a good opportunity to put a little bit of this in context. I think I've communicated in the past that when the region purchased the rail line, they purchased essentially a freight rail line with very limited capacity in terms of your ability to run trains. I know a couple of years ago, we shared kind of a benchmarking of how our region compared to other regions in terms of the frequencies of trains that we operate. We were very substandard and remain substandard. It was up until literally, I think a year and a half ago that we reached a milestone that we could begin the process of running commuter-focused service. And so we have received support from Sandag to run additional trains that really would offer the ability for people to make the choice to take public transportation, and in this specific case, commuter rail, because we'll be offering frequencies that cover the span of the market needs, which from the analysis that we had pre-COVID actually showed that the traditional peak time work schedule was eroding and that you had just longer periods of time where people would need transportation, where they would need additional options. And so again, from our general point of view, we're looking towards the future with improved services. A lot of what we're talking about doing with Metrolink and growing and increasing and giving natural market shares and one-seat rides. We think it's going to be really, really good for overall coaster and Metrolink operations in the future, that the best is yet to come in terms of ridership and customer revenue.
Thank you, Matt. I, for one, am very excited about the increase in frequency. I think I've told the story in the past that when my husband and I moved back to my hometown, San Diego, but Solana Beach in this case, that we were both going to work for Qualcomm. We were moving from Tokyo, where we took the train or the subway all of the time. And one of the reasons we chose Solana Beach was because of the train station, that we could get to work, that we could go to work at Qualcomm taking the train. And that was true at that time, but we couldn't get home because of that lack of frequency. And so I know that the key factors for making public transportation work is our frequency and reliability and competitive costs when compared to cars. And I think that we're moving in that direction. And I believe that's a big part of the Big Five moves. And so I, for one, am excited at where we're going. So thanks.
Thank you. Board Member Quirk.
I just want to say that I hope I'm wrong. I think, train and mass transit is great in theory. So I hope I'm absolutely wrong. But, I'm looking at the data, and it's not just for the coaster. I'm looking at transportation, agencies all across the country. The trends are very, very similar. And that was before COVID. You had multi-year, declines for, many, many cities across the country. So, Matt, I hear you, and let's see what happens with the increased ridership. I am extremely skeptical, or the increased runs, I'm extremely skeptical that they'll translate into ridership. But as you said, we've spent a lot of money. Now's the do or die. But my concern is that, the response in 2 years will be like, oh, well, we just need to build the tunnel through Del Mar and Miramar, and then we'll really be able to, offer that better service. It'll always be some sort of elusive target off in the future. Meanwhile, we have, these major technology disruptions that are going to start to be, more significantly felt in 10 or 15 years. So, I hope I'm wrong, but, I just see the data and the evidence and COVID, and seems like it's a, pretty pessimistic outlook when I look at it. So thank you, though.
Vice Chair Edson, is your hand back up?
It is backup. Thank you. I neglected to mention that I'm also concerned about the youth opportunity fairs and hope that we do move forward with working toward legislation that will allow us to fund programs such as this. So I know it's not part of the RTP, but I just wanted to state that for the record and thank Councilmember Contreras for bringing up that matter.
Okay, thank you. Anthony, are there any telephonic comments for this item?
No, sir.
All right. May I have a motion to approve agenda item 12?
So moved, Edson.
Second, Jenkins.
On the motion of Board Vice Chair Edson, seconded by Board Member Sharon Jenkins to approve agenda item number 12. Board Member Bapatal, how do you vote?
Aye.
Board Member Quirt,
Yes.
Board Chair Krantz,
Yes.
Board Member McNamara,
Yes.
Board Member Sanchez, Board Member Desmond, Board Member Jenkins,
Yes.
Board Vice Chair Edson,
Yes.
Board Member Contreras.
Aye.
On the motion of Board Vice Chair Edson, seconded by Board Member Jenkins to approve agenda item number 12, motion passes with all board members present voting yes, with the exception of Board Members Sanchez and Desmond absent.
Okay, thank you. Item 13, we will now conduct a public hearing and adopt FY 2022 operating budget and FY 2022 through 2026 capital improvement program and approve FY 2022 through 2031 service implementation plan. And the Chief Financial Officer, Yoon Park Lynch, will review this item.
Good afternoon, board members. I'm here to present the proposed fiscal year 2022 operating budget, as well as the 2022-2026 capital improvement program and the FY 22 and 31 service implementation plan. Since our last board meeting in May, we have published our board budget documents on June 1st. But as well, we provided all the budget activities that have taken place in the last few months. And we are now here at the finish line to ask the board to adopt our proposed budget. Our budget document was posted on June 1st at our administrative offices as well as our transit centers. And they were also available on our website. And we have not received any public comments to date. So the budget deliverables that we'll be asking the board to approve today, as I mentioned earlier, includes the operating budget as well as our capital improvement program, our fiscal year 2022 employee classification and compensation schedule, fiscal year 2022 cost recovery schedule, the disadvantaged business enterprise goal. This goal is set up every 3 years, as well as our 2022-2031 service implementation plan. Since our last presentation in May, we have not made any changes to our proposed budget. The assumptions for revenues and expenses remain the same. We continue our plan to transition our rail operations and rail maintenance staff on mid-June 2022, which will effectively increase our staffing levels by the end of this coming fiscal year to 257.5 FTEs, which represents an increase of 112 FTEs. Our projected ridership for the system remains at 7.2 million passengers. Our total revenues and expenses remains at $144.7 million. We will have a balanced budget, meaning that our total revenues and our total expenditures will remain the same. And for this coming fiscal year, we will rely on approximately $47 million from Federal CARES Act, as well as Federal American Rescue Plan Act, in order to support our operations. Within the payments that are not included within our operating budget are our pension and funded liability, as well as our debt payments. For the next coming fiscal year, as we presented back in April, we will make that additional payment towards our pension, which will allow us to achieve a fully funded plan by fiscal year 2035. In this slide, you can see the total operating revenues and total operating expenses for this coming fiscal year. Balanced budget at $144.7 million, with the major funding sources deriving from federal funding, the majority of that related to CARES Act and ARP funds, and local grants, which are mostly TDA and Transnet revenues that are generated from sales taxes in the county. Our major expenditures are purchase transportation contracts for the rail operations and maintenance, as well as bus operations and maintenance. The full transition for the rail operations will not occur until the last month of the fiscal year. That's why, for the most part, fiscal year 2022 includes mostly a full year of contracted services. Our second major expense are our professional services, for which the majority are associated with facilities maintenance contracts, law enforcement, as well as maintenance contracts for multiple maintenance activities that we do at both our offices and our transit centers. And then the third largest item on our budget are our employee salaries and wages. For the next 5 years, we envision a fully balanced budget, both on operations and capital. As you can see, by fiscal year 2026, as we are reducing quite a bit our capital investments, we should be able to achieve approximate $10 million surplus, which would allow us, in fact, to increase our capital program if we needed. Just something to point out is that the board goal for capital investments is $15 million a year. But as you can see, for the next 4 years, we will far exceed that goal. I'm sorry, try to. There you go. The fiscal year 2022 proposed employee classification and compensation schedule is shown in this slide. All positions within NCT must be included on one of these classes. These are used to determine guidelines for qualifications, as well as establishing comparability among different positions. It also provides the salary ranges within the different compensation levels at NCTD. For fiscal year 2022, this table was adjusted by the California Department of Industrial Relations CPI index of 1.83%. So from FY21 through FY22, we see an adjustment of 1.83%, which is the CPI that was used for this calculation. The proposed fiscal year 2022 cost recovery schedule is posted on our website. And those are the fees that we charge to third parties for services that are provided by NCT. By law, NCT is only able to charge fees for cost recovery or actual cost, meaning that charges are for either pass-through costs from contractor services or for actual wages, fully burdened benefits for staff time, for either right-of-way entry permits, special events, review work plans, and the other services requested from NCTD, with the majority of those related to right-of-way activities. The disadvantaged business and enterprise goal, this is a requirement for NCTD in order to continue receiving Federal Transit Administration funding. These goals are established for a period of 3 years. The latest goal is effective for the period from October 1st, 2019 through September 30, 2022. We did receive concurrence from the FTA on September 26 on our goals, which has established the 4.2% race neutral and 0% race conscious goal for this coming fiscal year. The proposed service implementation plan, the full document is attached as part of this agenda item. It has also been posted on our website. The service plan is a requirement under the MOU with Sandag, and it is also used to drive the preparation of our annual operating budget. Within some of the significant plans that we have for this coming year is the improved frequencies for coastal service, with the increase to 30 weekday trips and 20 weekend trips to start in October of this year, 2021, as well as converting some breeze routes to a new mobility as a service model that will include microtransit. So it is just to kind of point out some of the opportunities and some of the challenges that we see in the next coming fiscal year. Our top priority is recovery from COVID-19, as well as increasing that ridership. We are having significant investments in this coming fiscal year, either through business intelligence, market analysis, in order to figure out what is needed for NCTD to achieve that growth in ridership. We will also be advancing mobility as a service in this coming fiscal year, and our first phase of increased coastal frequencies in this October 2021. Big challenges that it's not only new to this coming fiscal year, but it's a continuous challenge, is really about funding to be for state of good repair and capacity enhancement funding projects. One of the biggest challenges is that in order to be competitive for discretionary grants, local grants are needed to be competitive, and within the local level, the majority of funding has come from Transnet, and those funds are for the most part maxed out for the next 5 years. Within the projects that are implemented by Sandag, we have over $700 million of needs, which includes the double tracking for the Springer to support the 15-minute headway service, as well as funding needed to complete the Sorrento to Miramar Phase 2 and the San Diego double track platform construction. These are midterm projects that are shovel ready, but there's no funding to finalize the construction. Other challenge that we see for next coming years are related to positive train control. This is a federal mandate, has been federal mandated. We receive funding for the capital implementation of PTC. However, no funding has been programmed from the FRA or the FTA to support PTC ongoing operations. We're looking at future costs of approximately over $3.5 million every fiscal year. Another big challenge, and you probably see these in the news, is our inflation pressures. Everything is going up in price, commodities, challenges in getting employees recruited. So this definitely would create inflationary pressures from both the operating and capital standpoint. And finally, there's a lot of conversations related to federal infrastructure bill. Nothing has been finalized at this point. The package is ever evolving. We don't know at this point in time whether or not what amount is that bill going to be for, and whether or not it's going to be formula-based, competitive. So a lot of uncertainty related to that funding source. So finally, to what we are requesting our board action today, and that board action includes closing the public hearing on the proposed fiscal year 2022 operating budget and the fiscal year 2022 to FY 2026 capital improvement program. Also, adoption of the proposed FY 22 employee classification and compensation schedule, adoption of the proposed operating budget for fiscal year 22 and the capital improvement program for 22-26. Also, the approval for the FY 2022 cost recovery fee schedule, the approval for the proposed disadvantaged business enterprise goal, and finally, the approval of the proposed fiscal year 2022 through fiscal year 2031 service implementation plan. So that concludes my presentation, and I am available for questions.
Thank you very much, Yoon. I can tell you that from my perspective, having you on the job and crunching these numbers and keeping Matt in line is very much appreciated. And I'm sure the rest of my colleagues on the board feel the same way. So thanks again for your efforts on that. Anthony, do we have any telephonic comments for this item?
No, sir.
Questions from the board? I see no raised hands. There's Mr. Quirk. Yes, sir.
Thank you. I thought the presentation was very helpful. I have concerns, I'm repeating myself about the budget and the capital expenditures projected. I just have extreme skepticism about the ability of ridership, particularly for the coaster, to rebound. I'm very supportive of budgets and CapEx for the bus program. I mean, that's great. Youth ridership, I would be very supportive as well. But the coaster is consuming a huge amount of dollars, and that's why I'm not going to vote in favor of the budget, because I think we really need to relook at our strategy. With all respect to what Matt previously said about we've got now these added tracks, and we'll be able to add more service. So now the rubber hits the road, and we'll get to evaluate as we get into this post-COVID. But for those reasons, I'm going to vote against the budget, primarily for all the spending related to the coaster, but don't take that as opposition to spending for all the other programs out here, especially the bus and things potentially like the youth pass. Thank you.
Okay. Can I get a motion to close the public hearing and adopt the FY 2022 operating budget and related documents as specified in the staff recommendation? I saw Jill's lips.
Sorry, so moved, Edson.
All right, I will second that.
On the motion of Board Vice Chair Edson, seconded by Board Chair Krantz, to close the public hearing and approve agenda item number 13, Board Member Bapatal, how do you vote?
Aye.
Board Member Quirk?
No.
Board Chair Krantz?
Yes.
Board Member McNamara?
Yes.
Board Member Sanchez? Board Member Desmond? Board Member Jenkins?
Yes.
Board Vice Chair Edson?
Yes.
Board Member Contreras?
Aye.
On the motion of Board Vice Chair Edson, seconded by Board Chair Krantz to close the public hearing and approve agenda item number 13, motion passes with all board members present voting yes, with the exception of Board Member Quirk votes no, and Board Members Sanchez and Desmond absent.
And Board Member Krantz, if I could, I just wanted to make just a closing remark related to the budget, or maybe a couple. Just first, as it relates to capital expenditures for the coaster, and I think most of the board members are aware, but I think it's important to make sure that anyone in the public is listening. Whether or not we operate the coaster, we're going to be responsible for the capital maintenance of the tracks and the infrastructure. We are owners and responsible for the entirety of the operations within San Diego County. So under all circumstances, if we were to eliminate coaster service tomorrow, we would still be responsible for providing positive train control, rail maintenance, signal systems, all of that infrastructure. Just wanted to make that clarification for that. Secondly, I do want to thank the staff on the budget process. The staff has done a great deal of work to get us to this point. The third point that I would make, which is kind of the future outlook for budgets, that there is a lot of challenges out there for all public and private agencies as we've tried to extend kind of this period of prosperity, and then we had the COVID, and now the actions that we are taking and transitioning. So one of the focus for us as NCTD staff is we always need to be looking forward. We don't really try to plan 1 year at a time or 2 years at a time. We try to look at 5 and 10-year trends and beyond that to make sure we're planning. So the next steps for us is going to be literally for you and I to work with the team to start looking at what are those things that we can do to do things better, more cost effectively going into the future. There's just a ton of uncertainty about how things are going to play out from a funding point of view. I think it's important that we start transitioning some of this discussion to the board as it relates to things, whether it be fares, free fares, subsidized fares. I think we need to have much more of a policy discussion and much more business intelligence to these things. And so we're committed as staff to bring that information to the board so that the board can look at these things from the fiscal impacts and also, more importantly, from the customer perspective. One of the things that I want to make sure that we do a much better job of articulating the message of our various different customers in terms of what they are saying that they would like. Because I think it would be important input for everyone to get that input from what would customers like to see as we make investments going in the future. So I just wanted to make those comments, but very appreciative of the work that staff did to get us to this point. So good job, you.
Yes, thank you. And I would also be remiss if I didn't mention that this process included opportunities to discuss the draft budget as well. And so there have been extensive conversations around this document. Today, we didn't have the same robust conversation, but it has been had and plenty of discussion about this current state of affairs. So thanks again. And we will now move on to item number 4 to discuss the resumption of in-person public meetings. And Laura Cote, our Chief Administrative Officer, will review the proposed staff recommendation to resume the in-person meetings.
And I'm going to jump in front of Laura just to introduce Laura Cote as our new Chief Administrative Officer. For some of you who've been around for a little while within the region, you would probably remember Laura was formerly Chief Operating Officer for San Diego Association of Governments. We were very, very fortunate to be able to bring Laura as part of our team, and she's making a meaningful difference in such a short time. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Laura.
Thank you and good afternoon, board. This is a great opportunity just to say it's been a wonderful experience to have joined this team and get to know them. And Matt is a great boss, so I'll just plug that too. All right, so we are here to have a discussion around the board's desire to resume meetings in person. And in late May, a memo was sent to the board recommending that these in-person board meetings could resume if desired. So in preparation for these meetings, the team has been implementing safety procedures, and we are tracking regulatory initiatives, as well as wanting now to understand from the board if there are any additional procedures that you would like to put into place. So today we're seeking guidance on next steps. However, before we do that and open to discussion, I would like to walk through all of the regulatory considerations that we are tracking at this time. So starting with the governor's order, the governor's office did not lift the emergency order on June 15th as it relates to virtual public meetings. And he has indicated that he recognizes the importance of an orderly return to ordinary conduct of public meetings of state and local agencies and boards. His current amendment order states that this portion of the order will be rescinded on September 30th. What this means is that this board is able to continue meeting virtually as it has for the last 15 months until the order is formally lifted. It is our hope that we will know well in advance of that time what bills would become law that could impact how your meetings are conducted. So with that said, there are 2 state bills that we are watching, AB 361 and AB 339. AB 361 doesn't offer a provision for amending the Brown Act. However, it does allow for memorializing during pandemics and future emergencies that teleconferencing could be used for all purposes in connection with any meeting within the subject matter jurisdiction of the legislative body. AB 339 does change the Brown Act so that it requires that internet or telephonic choices are available to the public until December 31st, 2023, This is for city councils and boards of supervisors containing at least 250,000 people within their jurisdiction. The bill also allows for the governing body to participate via telephone or internet. However, the current rules about posting agendas stands, which requires agendas to be posted at all locations where each member of the governing body would be located. Also, each location must be accessible by members of the public. So we don't know for sure yet if this bill will be amended to include all local governments versus just city councils and boards of supervisors. However, we have been in touch with our advocacy consultant, Richard Harmon, who is actually presenting on an item later today, and he isn't aware of any current movement toward amending this bill or any other bill at this time that is being developed to allow more flexibility for virtual meetings. Of course, the session is not over yet. We have about a month to go, and so we'll be closely tracking what the legislature is doing. So also at the state level, we have been following closely with Cal OSHA and the California Department of Health. Cal OSHA, well, my speaking points changed about an hour ago because they did finally close their meeting, another marathon that started at 10 this morning. But they did vote on their regulations. They did adopt the revisions that were submitted a few days ago. And they are now, as they quote, in alignment with CDC and California Department of Health, as well as the governor's order. So normally these regulations would take place or become effective 10 days after their adoption. So in this case, the 27th of June. However, we have been hearing that the governor is indicating that he might make these changes effective immediately with an executive order. So we're waiting to hear on that one. The California Department of Health offered guidance on June 9th that was then enacted into law a few days later. These are the laws that I would say are most relevant to this board regarding how to address when members of the public wish to attend meetings in person. The law provides options on the process for non-employees to access the location by either 1, self-attesting that they are vaccinated, or 2, show proof of vaccination, or 3, the agency could require everyone to wear masks, including board members and employees. In support of these options, the governor's office has indicated that it is working on a quote, vaccine verification system that businesses could use to check customer vaccination status. They've also highly noted that this would be voluntary, it is not required. The process for allowing members of the public to attend meetings in person is a decision point that we are seeking guidance on at this time. Moving on to the federal level, the CDC continues to offer guidance, and the DOT agencies are incorporating some of these guidelines into their own regulations. As of today, the U.S. Department of Transportation and the TSA have extended the face mask requirement through September 13th for individuals across all transportation networks throughout the United States, including at airports, onboard commercial aircraft, on over-the-road buses, and on commuter bus and rail systems. This mandate not only applies to passengers, it also applies to our own employees and our contract employees that provide these services or are located in what is called a transportation hub, such as our Oceanside Transit Center. Corporate offices, such as the one where the board room is located, is technically exempt from this law, and we could then follow local and state orders instead. However, the CDC last Thursday announced that they would soon be amending this order so that face masks would not be required for fully vaccinated individuals in outdoor areas at transportation hubs or on the conveyances such as buses or rail cars with open air locations. Indoors, a face mask would still be required until September 13th. So we have compiled, to help with this discussion, a list of frequently asked questions that we have heard from both board members and employees regarding in-person meetings. I hope as we go through these, many of your questions will be answered, but certainly we'll have opportunity to ask additional questions. So the first one is, will board committee members have the option to attend via Zoom? So the answer would be yes, certainly for the foreseeable future, at least through September 30th. And again, we're tracking any bills that would allow for more flexibility, but also remember that the Brown Act does certainly have rules in place already that would allow for teleconferencing or internet meetings. As I mentioned before, it would require noticing every single location that a board member is participating from. It would also require a posting of the agenda at that location and access to that location by the public. Finally, a quorum of the legislative body must participate from locations within the jurisdiction. Can we accommodate all board members at the dais? Yes, we can accommodate all members at the dais. As of June 15th, physical distancing is no longer required at this time. Will there be partitions between board members? The answer at this time is no, that since they are not required. What will the capacity of the boardroom be? Well, technically, as of now, full capacity is allowed, which is up to 65 people, but certainly we have some procedures that we need to work through before we get there, hence the discussion today. How will overflow capacity for members of the public be handled if capacity is reached? We are blessed. We do have 2 rooms, at least 2 rooms that we can utilize for overflow, and we have done that and are prepared to do that if needed. Will the public be allowed to make comments via Zoom? So should the board wish to implement this option, then certainly we would make this available. And staff is working currently through some of the technical requirements that would support this. We would need to come back to the board, however, on a timeline for implementing this, if this is the way that the board would like us to proceed. Will everyone be screened for body temperature and symptoms? At this time, the process is no longer recommended by the California Department of Health after the 15th. However, we will follow certainly any state and local guidance on this if it changes. And one of the other things that we've spoken about, if we observe anyone with flu-like symptoms, a mask will be provided. Will we all have to wear masks? Well, this is the big question for this board to consider as far as how we'd like to proceed. As mentioned before, California Department of Health has offered options to this agency. And now we have the Cal OSHA regs adopted so that we can apply that to our employees. So the district really does need to decide on the process for members of the public to attend. And again, that's either through self-attestation, proof of vaccination, or requiring a mask to be worn by everyone in the room. Next question is, will we have masks available? Yes, certainly we will have masks available. If masks are required for members of the public, how would we handle individuals who refuse to wear one, and who will be on hand if the situation escalates? Certainly security and safety, #1 priority for all of us. And we do have security personnel that, if you recall in the past, for those of you who have been here, we do have someone stationed to help us with that. So we would be looking to them to partner with us if we are having any issues. So can members of the public show proof of vaccine in lieu of wearing a mask? Yes, that is one of the options, and we'll be discussing that shortly. And another question that's come up is, have we made upgrades to our HVAC system? And we did mention this in the memo that went to the board back in May. We have recently made updates to the system. And for those of you who are tracking sort of the technical considerations of filtration and levels, right now we have something called MERV 11, which does meet the EPA standard for airborne viruses. However, we have MERV 13 filters on order. As you can imagine, those are very limited in stock, but we certainly are hopeful that they will be here by the September board meeting, should we be here in person. So I wanted to remind everyone what the boardroom looks like before we talk. And I also understand there might be 1 or 2 board members that may not have actually been here before, at least in a board discussion. So hopefully this will at least offer some level of understanding of the board dais and how it is set up. All right, so at this time for the discussion, we are seeking some very specific feedback, but certainly open and would answer any questions that you have regarding this. The key questions are, 1, the desire of the board to meet in person as of September. The second one, if there is an interest in allowing for hybrid meetings where board and committee members can participate either in person or virtually. Next, allow members of the public to attend the meeting in person, allow virtual telephonic public comment, and finally, which process shall be used regarding vaccination status so that we are following the California Department of Health. So that is the conclusion of my presentation, and happy to answer any questions at this time.
Okay, thank you. I think that it is one more step on the road to the new normal, and I look forward to it personally. But I recognize that not everybody is in the same place. So, Board Member Quirk, you have some comments?
I thought it was a great discussion, very informative, lots of good questions. We're asking the same ones for our own city council meeting. And I would just make a comment that, at least at the Del Mar City Council, there's a lot of interest in exploring hybrid meetings, this option to be in person or via Zoom during this transitional phase. Thank you.
Board Member Bhat Patel?
Sure, thank you. And yes, this is a really great conversation for us to be having. I think I'm just kind of going to go down the slide and have some comments for each particular question here. But I think, of course, having in-person meetings starting in September sounds like a realistic goal based on, it sounds like we'll be on a positive trajectory as we're moving forward. With regards to hybrid meetings, I think that would be great. It allows for the flexibility for folks as we're trying to navigate this new landscape to be able to feel comfortable as we're moving forward. And then also, I think the other pieces, if you think about it from a transit and climate change perspective, for those that might be driving, you're saving those gas miles and you're able to still participate virtually and do the same thing. And then I think, obviously from folks from the public, I am really excited that there was legislation that's being considered that'll allow for folks at all different levels of jurisdiction at the state level to be able to actually do virtual and telephonic public comments. I actually feel that even at the city, we've actually seen increased engagement from folks, and that people that may be working or have a lot of other things going on in their lives may not necessarily have the opportunity to take 20, 30 minutes out of their day to drive first to the city council meeting, then wait or a board meeting, and then wait, until the agenda item is called. But with this, they have the opportunity to continue about their day. And then when the agenda item is called, they have the opportunity to say what they need to say. And so I personally feel that we should make it more accessible to people. I really do encourage the rest of the board to hopefully feel similarly and do the same so we can have increased engagement. I do think that we've seen, I would say, I'm sure we definitely saw it in our city. I'm sure everyone else saw increased engagement during the time of COVID with their cities as well. And then, that's basically it. But that piece I'm like very excited about and hoping that that's something that we can actually, accommodate here at NCTD. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Vice Chair Edson.
Yes, thank you. I echo the thoughts that were just shared by Councilmember Bhat Patel. I am excited to come back in September, and I do look forward to a possible hybrid scenario, especially because we all have a lot of demands and might be traveling and things like that. In the past, the best we could do is call in. Zoom gives us a lot more, the ability to see each other and to see the slides and to really participate. I like this hybridness, and I agree that I think it's been a really good thing for the public. I think it has accommodated the public. If there's a silver lining, it's allowing more public participation without having to trek there during the day. So those are my comments. I did not address which process should be used by vaccination, shall be used by that, which vaccination status is proven in order to forego wearing a mask. I would assume that for me, I would be comfortable if people have proven vaccination status would be able to forego wearing masks. But, I think it's up to the individual, because I think that even people who are vaccinated, for example, my 89.5-year-old dad, he's wearing his mask anyway. It's just a safety issue, personal safety issue. So those are my comments. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Board Member Contreras.
thanks. Yeah, I just want to continue echoing the comments that have been made before. I'm happy to look at September as our target date for resuming in person, but the hybrid meeting option, just like board member Bat Patel said, I mean, it's really great to be able to reduce your greenhouse gas emissions and still be able to participate in a meaningful way. So I would like to have those hybrid options available. And for the public, it's great frustration in my city that we moved to in person without having a hybrid option. So that's something I'm still trying to fight for. So if we could do that here, for this body, I think it's incredibly important, especially since, our meetings are earlier in the day. So I would like to have a virtual and telephonic way for the public to comment. I think if someone from the public wants to attend a meeting, I think they definitely should be able to in person. I don't have too much of an opinion when it comes to proving vaccination status or wearing masks. But yeah, that's pretty much all I have for comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Board Member McNamara.
Thank you, Chair. I agree with my colleagues. I think we should have the hybrid model available. There will be some meetings where perhaps in person would be more advantageous to facilitate discussion. But one of the things I think we've all found over this past year that we can get a lot of work done with this using Zoom or those types of mediums to communicate. And there isn't the environmental concern. I mean, for someone like me, it's a 30 to 45-minute drive to come to the meeting. And if we can accomplish everything through Zoom, I think that would be a heck of a lot more efficient. In regards to the people attending, my thoughts are that we should probably just stay with the state guidance and kind of ease into this. And then as we find out whether or not we'll have a resurgence of COVID in the winter months, we might be able to adjust. And that's my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Board Member Jenkins.
Yeah, I won't, let me see if I won't repeat everything everybody just said, but I would agree. I'm fine with September. I do like the hybrid so people can decide if they can go to the meeting or want to do the virtual. So I pretty much agree with what everybody has said. That's it.
Vice Chair Edson.
I do have a question for Laura. I know that as Councilmember Quirk mentioned, our cities are all looking at these same issues or questions and whatnot. And my understanding was that a quorum would need to be present in order to offer the virtual. Is that correct, Laura, for a district versus a city council?
It's actually, well, what my understanding of the Brown Act here, and I'm getting the nod from General Counsel, that it is just within the jurisdiction. It's not all at one place in person. You may be thinking of a bill that was going through that did eventually get, well, maybe killed, but it did have that provision in there, but that would have amended the current Brown Act. So currently it's just within jurisdiction.
Thank you.
So Vice Chair Edson, this is Lori, General Counsel. Yes, I did review the Brown Act as it exists today outside of the governor's order, and it does allow for teleconferencing of at least a quorum of the members of the legislative body have to participate from locations within the boundaries of the territory over which the local agency exercises jurisdiction, of which all of you at your city councils at least do. So we could look at that as a potential hybrid model.
And a follow-up on that is pre-COVID Brown Act requirements included the agenda identifying the address where each board member would be participating in the meeting from, and that location had to be accessible by the public. Are those, do we anticipate post-COVID that they will, those specific requirements will not be part of the Brown Act or temporarily suspended, or how do you think that's going to work out?
I think that remains to be seen, but at the present time, there's no legislation that I'm aware of that's making its way through the state legislature that would modify those provisions of the Brown Act, at least as to NCTD.
So therefore, the governor's order, if it's rescinded, allowing flexibility, then we go back to the original requirements of posting an agenda with the address of where everyone will participate from.
Yes, and also with the allowance for parties to, or public members to participate and have access to those remote locations.
Okay. Board Member Contreras, did you have your hand back up?
No, sorry about that.
No problem. How about you, Sharon?
I'm done. Thank
You're
you.
good. Okay, and I see there is some, are we looking for a motion on this? How are we supposed to incorporate all of this conversation into a motion?
At this time, my understanding is that you could do a motion, but we're certainly able at this point to move forward with September.
Let's just move forward with direction that we prepare for the September meeting as outlined in this presentation. And we all know that there is indeed a state of flux on many of these issues, and so we'll have to be flexible about the final outcome and decisions that are made. And I'll count on the general counsel and executive director to come up with a meeting format that will comply with the law and comply with the desires of the board.
Thank you very
Okay.
much. Appreciate it.
Thank you. So we are now into our informational items, and there is one of them, and it's from Mr. Richard Harmon of Townsend Public Affairs, who has been very busy up at the Capitol, working to keep track of all the largesse that the politicians are spreading amongst the crowds.
Thank you. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, sir.
Perfect. Yeah, at the Capitol, but not at the Capitol. They did open it to limited capacity this week, but it's pretty much still restricted. I think 500 members of the public can now access it at a time, but it's still fairly restricted. And most staff is still working remotely. So thank you, Mr. Chair, board members. It's an honor again to be able to present and give this update. I will highlight just a couple things before I jump into the presentation. During the last presentation on public meetings, in fact, the governor did sign that executive order allowing those workplace changes that Cal OSHA voted on to take effect immediately. So it literally happened. And I sent the copy of that executive order over to staff during that presentation. So that is all now in effect. And just to echo on to the discussion regarding resumption of in-person meetings, agree with everything that was said. Things at the state level are very much fluid. There are the legislation moving through. However, with all of the actions taking place this week with the reopenings, there's still opposition to some of the mandates on the allowing the internet-based meetings to continue on. The AB 339 that was mentioned, particularly from local agencies, special districts, given the reliance on companies such as Zoom to conduct business and sort of the legal and other ramifications that could have if there's ever disruption of services, and the larger issue of, hey, there's probably been a lot of best practices that have been learned during the pandemic in terms of how meetings can be conducted. So what is the rush to try to jam something through for future changes right now? So a ton remains to be seen. Literally have 2 months between now and when the legislature comes back from their recess to finish out session. So a lot's going to happen with the reopening. How's it going forward? What are we learning? So a lot remains to be seen, and we'll continue to work with staff on any updates with that. So given that, I'll move into the presentation. I'll probably pack a lot into just the first part of this first slide. Some of the rest is will go quicker. But as you probably know, the deadline for the legislature to approve a budget was Tuesday, June 15th. So just this last Tuesday, the legislature did not reach an agreement with the governor by June 15. They did approve what was their proposed budget, which in many ways is similar to what the governor's proposed, but a lot of big items are still under negotiation. The vote that was taken was one, to comply with the Constitution that budget be approved by June 15th, but also ballot measures from the last few years that required pay to legislators be contingent upon a balanced budget being passed by June 15th. So by taking that action, they've done that. They don't have to send this bill to the governor for his consideration. They can send it to him. They'd have to pull it back, but they approved it knowing he was not going to ever see the bill in front of him for his consideration, that they are continuing to talk. And this isn't a situation where they're really fighting over scarce resources, as you know. It's more the good problem of, hey, we have too much money. How should we best spend it all? So really the next couple of weeks, they're going to continue those negotiations. We heard that yesterday, negotiations between the legislative and administration budget staffs really began in earnest. So that will be continuing on for the next couple of weeks. A lot of those bigger issues, and I'll just use maybe broadband and even transportation as one where they can include some high level dollar numbers. Like many of you have been following broadband, where there's $7 billion from the federal government for broadband. They approved that in the budget, but all the specifics of these big issues will fall into those budget trailer bills that accompany the main budget bill. And the legislature's actions earlier this week was simply a main budget bill with dollar amounts attached. What they will do now is they'll negotiate on all these big issues. They'll come back here in the next couple of weeks when they've reached agreement. They will pass what we call budget bill juniors, which are mini budget bills that will actually make changes to some of those dollar amounts given the deal that's negotiated. And then they will probably approve 30 plus trailer bills in different policy areas that will make statutory changes. So if they approve, for example, the $7 billion related to broadband, that trailer bill is going to reflect how that money goes out, what it goes to fund. All of those details will need to be included in that. There are no deadlines until they adjourn for when those trailer bills can be passed, but most of that will be negotiated and approved pretty much all together before the end of this month. So lots of details still to be worked out. And I say all that because the next couple slides do have some of the things we're following in the budget, and I'll update you all on where those are at, what we're still waiting to hear. The deadline, the legislature does adjourn September 10th. They go out July 16th for their summer recess, and then they come back August 16th, and then they'll be adjourned by September 10th, and the governor has until October 10th to act on bills. So as part of the state budget this year, we've been looking at regulatory relief efforts and funding in some different areas. So maybe with that, Anthony, if you'd go to the next slide. This is something you saw last month. I think it was last month in the presentation. These are the provisions from last year's budget related to the pandemic, some relief efforts that were granted to transit agencies. Our understanding is all of these are going to be included in the final budget that's agreed to. The only piece I think we're waiting on related to the relief efforts is the timing. The request has been that these be extended through fiscal year 23-24. I have not heard there's any reason that they wouldn't go out that far, but that is, I think, the one piece that's still to remain unresolved. Somewhat related to this, and I think we spoke about this last time, the Transit Association has led efforts related to the Transportation Development Act and some reforms that should take place, and that's an effort that's gone on over the last 2+ years with a coalition of groups, with transit agencies, legislative stakeholders. There are a number of provisions they'd like to see changed in the TDA. The administration is okay with including that as part of a budget deal that would go into some trailer bill language. One of the items in that TDA reform is what was mentioned earlier in the meeting today regarding transit fare subsidies and the use of LC-TOP funds for that purpose to make sure we're not missing out on any money by using those subsidies. The legislature, however, thinks that maybe it's a little bit rushed, and given everything, we're barely, emerging from the pandemic, perhaps this is something that should be discussed during a full legislative year. So the legislature is wanting to slow things down a little bit to talk about it. That is something that's still being negotiated, whether some of those reform efforts are included in the budget. If I had to bet on it, I'd probably say it's not included this year, just given how they're already past that June 15 deadline. They got a lot of work to do. It likely won't be, but I'll hold out some hope. And related to that, I know we spoke, I believe, at the last meeting on the issue of non-medical transportation, how we had tried to do something via legislation this year to work on this issue with Sandag MTS and the Transit Association. We made another effort to have that issue included as part of the discussions in the state budget. That won't be part of those discussions, but it will be something CTA helps agencies with in the coming legislative year. Next slide, Anthony. So what is in, so I'll differentiate here. These are some different pots of funding that are included for everything from zero emission to transit rail. Much of this is consistent between what the governor proposed in his May revised budget proposal, as well as what the legislature included in theirs. I would just note the zero emission issue is something they still are negotiating. I don't have reason to expect these numbers will change dramatically, but there is discussions about how funding should go out for zero emission. But I would anticipate we should see some of these numbers once a final budget is improved. You'll notice at the bottom under transit, rail, and other, they still have yet to decide, and this is what will be in some of the budget trailer bills, how that funding will be distributed. There are existing programs such as trade corridors, such as transit and intercity rail programs that currently exist. So some of this funding could go out via those existing sources in just a special solicitation. That has all yet to be resolved. And clearly the $1 billion associated with the LA Olympics, there's a lot of detail to go behind that. One I didn't list here, but does have a relationship that we're watching. Both the legislature and the governor have proposed including $500 million to augment the state's active transportation program. As many of you know, coming from cities, that program is severely oversubscribed. They're only able to fund, I think, 40 projects a year at the state level when they receive several hundred. So this California Transportation Commission this year had asked the governor to include $2 billion to completely fund that backlog of ATP projects. The governor did include the 500 and the legislature did as well. So the CTC is actually discussing at their meeting next week, should they receive this funding, how will that go out to help with those projects? And I mention that because those do tie in well with transit facilities and getting folks onto transit. Next slide, please. I'll move quickly through these. I've included this one. This was the issue of the non-medical transportation mentioned earlier. This was potentially a vehicle for some changes this year. In next month's report, this will probably drop off as it's put on hold, and we'll talk about it next year. I will make one note as we look at legislation. The leadership of both the Senate and the Assembly made the decision this last month that they are going to limit the number of bills that members are able to advance forward. We crossed the threshold of when bills had to leave their own house of where they were introduced and go to the second house, if you know your legislative process. And they're limiting that to 12 bills per member. I'd made some comments recently with the former legislator, and I said, 12 bills per member is actually quite substantial, I thought, especially if you're a Republican member. That's more than you get usually in a few years. He made the comment, he was a former Democratic legislator, he made the comment that, well, coming from someone who introduced 30 bills a year, 12 bills, trying to pick and choose is hard to do. But leadership has done that, so there'll be a limited number of bills that actually make it forward here the next couple months. So this is one put on hold. We'll be looking to work with CTA on this issue next year. Next slide, Anthony. These two bills, we've been following. AB 917 allows the use of video imaging on parking enforcement around transit stops. And AB 1337 allows for enforcing folks who are on property, on facilities, on vehicles, and causing disruption. Next slide, please. Ms. Borno-Hvac has been pursuing $2.5 million the last couple of years, actually, to do some coastal erosion and cliff landslides study work out of UC San Diego. I have every suspicion this will be dropped once the budget is approved. There's $2.5 million included for this purpose in the legislature's bill they approved on Monday. So it looks like this funding will already be in the budget. So this bill will probably drop off. AB 302 is one we've been working with MTS all year regarding their regulation of transportation services. Next slide. Next, AB 1049 will also drop off after this report. This was looking to shift some public transportation account funding regarding the high-speed passenger, the high-speed rail project. This is not moving forward. AB 1260 is moving forward. It exempts from CEQA public transit projects that relate to infrastructure charging and refueling zero-emission trains. So that one is continuing to move forward. And next slide. Finally, the last couple, SB 44 by Senator Allen looks at larger transformative environmental leadership transit projects. Again, zero emission, reducing greenhouse gases, not through offsets. It would allow for streamlined procedures, particularly on the judicial review of those projects under CEQA. It's not CEQA exemption. And then SB 66 is a council on the future of transportation related to other modes, particularly autonomous vehicles, how they're deployed. This is one we're following, as transit will be a key stakeholder at the table as this issue is considered in the future. And I think with that, I'll be available for questions now or following the rest of this on the funding efforts.
Hello, this is Katie. I'll give a quick update on our competitive grant efforts. On this slide, these two program requests are related to NCTD's hydrogen fueling station infrastructure project and our transition to zero emission bus operations. So that first one, the California Energy Commission, NCTD was awarded just over $4 million toward the design and construction of the station. Since we last updated the board on this, staff have executed a grant agreement with the CEC and kicked off the project with them. And then related to that, we submitted a $2.3 million LC top allocation request as match funding toward the construction of the hydrogen fueling station, and we expect to hear back on that in the next couple of weeks. Next slide. On the federal side, I believe we mentioned in the last presentation a month or two ago that the earmark process is back. We submitted a few projects for consideration, including hydrogen bus procurement, our hydrogen fueling station infrastructure, and replacement of Bridge 257.2 on the Low Sand Corridor. So since then, Congressman Mike Levin has submitted a request for hydrogen fueling station funding on our behalf, and the Senate earmark process, the requests are due over the next couple of weeks. So we anticipate giving an update on that over the next couple of months. And then in April, we submitted a request for $7 million in funding toward the procurement of 25 fuel cell electric buses. And as part of our California Energy Commission award for station infrastructure, we plan to deploy those 25 buses by March 2025. So to meet that goal, we'll need to continue to be aggressive and persistent in our request for bus funding. Next slide. So we're a bit limited in the size of our funding requests that we can make due to a lack of local match funding, like Yoon mentioned today, but we still plan to make progress on a few of our capital needs. So we plan to request funding from the US DOT to advance design of Sprinter double tracking, which when constructed would allow us to increase service from 30-minute frequency to 15-minute frequency. And we'll be submitting that grant application on July 12th of this year. And then our FTA bus and bus facilities program, we're eagerly anticipating that announcement. It hasn't been released yet, but we plan to request up to 15 million for the purchase of those 25 hydrogen fuel cell electric buses. And that's all for me.
Okay, thank you for all that information. I was following along quite closely on the CTC situation. California Transportation Commission made a remarkable request of the governor to fund an additional $2 billion worth of those grant proposals, which would have funded every project above 60 points that scored greater than 60 points. And it would go from 40 projects to about 320 projects, with projects in essentially every county in the state. Many of the projects to disadvantaged communities. And most importantly, as far as I was concerned, it would have included the Encinitas Streetscape project, $20 million. But ultimately, he decided on a quarter of what the CTC had recommended, and so we won't make that cut. I think Vista had some projects in there. I don't know if they made it. Escondido had some projects in there. I hope you are more successful than we were, but in the meantime, I do not see any hands raised. So,
Chair, I would make, following up on your comments, I think there was a rough estimate done looking at the 500 million, and if the CTC were to apply those funds straight down that list in scoring order, it potentially would reach down to about scores of 83 on your application. So if anyone's taking a look at the unfunded list to see where their projects are, 83 is probably a somewhat of a range if they do that. However, at the last CTC meeting, when they did discuss this last month, there were stakeholders who said folks who didn't apply in the last round are then disadvantaged because they didn't apply because the program is historically so oversubscribed. Competition is so hard that it's almost not worth the effort, especially for smaller disadvantaged communities, to actually put an application together, not expecting any funding, and then arguing there should be a new round opened up for that augmentation money, as opposed to just going down the list. So as soon as the CTC releases its staff report and draft framework prior to next Wednesday's meeting, they're gonna have a lot of comments come in about what that process should look like. So let us know if you want some updates. Next Wednesday, we should have updates at least on what the CTC is thinking about that. It would be nice if they did just go down the list. It's simple. It gets rid of some of that backlog and opens it up. But there's a lot of stakeholders out there who just want a piece of that and want something different with some valid arguments. I'm not dismissing their argument. They have valid arguments as well. So I'll try to keep updates on that included in what I provide staff for weekly updates and things.
Well, when I was dreaming of the CTC getting their wish fulfilled by the governor and legislature, I noticed Santa Barbara had $64 million worth of projects, two big projects they threw in the kitchen sink. So they would have been in pretty good shape in Santa Barbara. Interestingly, both of those projects were in disadvantaged parts of their community. So interesting. And ultimately, I think this is more of a conversation that the cities are having. NCTD hasn't submitted anything there. So with that, I will ask Vice Chair Edson has the floor.
Thank you. I was also interested very much in the CTC issue. My city, Solana Beach, scored in the low 80s on a project. So we're kind of sitting on the edge of our seat, hoping that something happens that helps us. Richard, I thought that you mentioned the governor was looking at 500 million and maybe the legislator or Senate adding another 500. No,
they also proposed the same 500 million.
Okay, so same number. Oh, darn.
Yeah, we made a pitch on behalf of some cities for the legislature to increase that from that 500 million and add more, but I think they're picking their fights with the governor and thought that the 500 million got them a ways down the road. So
And on that list of dollar amounts for rail, there was $1 billion for rail and then $1 billion for the Olympics. So that's essentially LA Olympics is getting as much as the rest of the state. Is that how it shakes out?
It is, and we're still, the trailer bill will set up some framework around how that funding will go out, but they will be looking at the larger, I think, Southern California and potentially even from Central and Northern California. How are folks going to access those Olympics? So those investments could reach into a much broader area than just like an LA County or LA San Bernardino County. You could be looking at a farther reach, particularly south, where there are good, if they can make some good, efficient investments, say from the San Diego region, that could be part of the discussion. So this is literally all the language we have on it now, but there will be more detail coming forward. So don't think we may be out of any of this funding.
And I suppose the vagueness of that particular, those items is probably has the same, the grade separation part is probably just as vague, or do we know more about that? In other words, is it specifically for automobile grade separations, or will there be pedestrian grade separation projects that'll be part
I
of
will
it?
read you the whole line. High priority grade separations and grade crossing improvements, 500 million general fund to support critical safety improvements throughout the state.
Yeah.
So,
okay.
Open to still a lot of work.
All right, very good. Seeing no other hands raised, I will thank you, Mr. Harmon, and keep up the good work. Keep us posted if anything changes.
Will do. Thank you all.
Next, we have the Executive Director's report. Mr. Tucker, do you have anything to report?
Yes, sir. A couple of things. I do want to just go down a list of things I want to mention to the board. A couple of months ago, I mentioned to the board about bus operator staffing, the fact that we have a significant amount of vacancies. That is an ongoing issue. It's very similar to the broader discussion that's been held about people coming back to work. One of the things we've seen is a big shift in terms of wages in the market. Just a little while ago, we had engaged less than a year ago with MV Transportation, our contractor, to make adjustments to come in alignment with the market. But now the market has shifted at least by $2 per hour. And so we're going to be working closely with MV Transportation to address this issue. We have about 37 to 40 vacancies. The application process has been slow. We need to find a way to move that up critically. We're taking some mitigation steps in terms of recutting the way that work is organized to try to maximize the staffing that we have. That process is going to take us a couple of months to actually implement. But I do want to make sure the board is aware of that. Damon's going to be coming to the board next month. One of his items is going to just focus in on cause of delay, and this is going to be one of the causes of delays. He will have more information, so no worries. We will be prepared to provide that. I just wanted to share that with you all. If you track our pages, you will see from time to time that there are challenges related to bus operator staffing. The next topic is just mobility as a service and microtransit. We're using these terms a little bit synonymous. It's actually good that we are doing it because we have pulled back our procurement process that we had for a mobility app, and we are now refocusing it as mobility of a service as a service, which would include a broad range of services, including an app, including microtransit, including things like reward programs and other features. So we would anticipate that we would be back on the street procuring that over the next couple of months. It's a critical part of our plan because it supports both first and last mile services, but it also is intended to create these opportunities for much more efficient trips for people who have to take short distance trips. I want to make sure the board understands we also see their changes and desires changes and desires from our customers about how they take trips. Obviously, making some adjustments to make their trip a little bit easier for them, allow them to be in a lot more control is something that we think will support ridership. Things like getting kids, middle kids to schools and high schools is something that we also are very much looking at. How do we capture greater market share? So we will be providing the board more and more updates as this progresses, but it's a really big deal thing for us. The breeze speed and reliability study. I know we seem to talk a lot about rail, but we're doing a lot related to the bus system. And it's one of the more important things is looking at the road the road system and some of the infrastructure that's out there. So we're going to be advancing that sooner rather than later. Hopefully in the next month or so, we'll have some announcements in terms of some support leadership that we're going to bring on board to help us navigate it. The reason that I'm highlighting it is we need our board members to be champions at home, to make sure that their city managers and public works directors are actively engaged. We've identified like a 10 route network that we want to be super duper high performing. This is one of these opportunities for both the transit agencies and the cities, particularly on their roads, that we can partner to seek grants that will offer potentially significant opportunities to make infrastructure investments. So we are really counting on the board members to be active participants in this process, encouraging the cities to come to the table and help us develop plans that can be implemented and, of course, be competitive within the discretionary grant world. The last thing I will just mention is discussions with Metrolink. I know we discussed that last month. We mentioned that we had executed that non-bonding agreement. I can tell you since that time, we have gotten on the treadmill, and if that treadmill goes up to 16 miles per hour, we're at 25. We are hopeful that within the next few weeks that we will actually have a final agreement in place. We seem to have nailed down most issues. There's one or two issues that need to be resolved, but I think there's a path to be able to resolve those issues. As you spoke to about the Olympics, those are the types of things that we're looking to capture from a rail market point of view. The Olympics, the Super Bowl, Major League Baseball events, and just the normal activities that make Southern California great. You know, one of the things I mentioned last month is just imagine their capability to be able to go in between, whether it be SeaWorld or Disneyland or you name the attraction between here and LA, and have a significant frequency of trains running every 20 to 30 minutes with a broader span of those services, and thinking about the potential power that would have to divert people from their cars onto trains. So that's why I'm trying to make sure we keep in mind we're actually at the beginning of the journey to provide people high quality transit services, and I mean across all modes. But I do think it's also going to be one of the more important times that we are data driven and that we focus in on making decisions using the best data available to us. But again, always thinking about not short term, but thinking about the long term. That's like we should be when we invest our dollars. So with that, that's all my feedback.
Okay, thank you. And I would like to say that I took board member Sanchez's comments to heart, and I busted out my grandfather's Robert's Rules of Order. And I am here to confess that I made some mistakes last week, and I apologize to everyone. The bad news on the Robert's Rules was, however, made up for by our board policy, which essentially allows knuckleheads like me to wing it. So, you know, unless we want to bring that board policy back, there may be more occasions like last week, but I think we've been pretty peaceful and throughout the history of my service, which is 8+ years. So I look forward to continuing to have meetings that accomplish a lot. So there's that. The other issue that came up last meeting had to do with the Brown Act and whether there were violations of that. And I would just like to go on the record to say that, as far as the email that we got from Board Member Quirk, I didn't consider that to be a violation. The other issues, it isn't NCTD's place to make a determination about violations of the Brown Act. So there was a lot of scuttlebutt going around Del Mar apparently. And I did want to say that, Board Member Quirk's efforts to get people to take a look at his presentation that he was going to make, I thought was pretty benign. And so I appreciate his efforts there. And if there are any other board member comments, you can feel free to make those now. Vice Chair Edson.
Yes, is this the appropriate time to report LoSAN
It is.
information? Okay, the LoSAN Pacific Surfliner has seen steady increases in ridership over the last few months. And it's believed that many opportunities to continue recovering ridership exist this summer as attractions and events welcome back more visitors, touching on what Matt just mentioned as well. As a result, LoSAN is adding more trips to the Pacific Surfliner schedule as a first step toward service restoration, and they're implementing measures to manage capacity during peak travel weekends, including for specific really high peak travel weekends requiring reservations. So that's a big move. Ridership is forecast to continue a strong recovery as we see the easing of travel restrictions and the waning of the pandemic. The Pacific Surfliner performed very well in the month of May with total ridership of 83,813, which is a 29% increase over the prior month and the highest monthly ridership since the pandemic began. So ahead of what is expected to be a busy travel season, the LoSAN agency has adjusted the Pacific Surfliner service, including the partial restoration of the schedule along the busiest portions of the corridor. With that in mind, effective June 28th, 3 round trips will be added to the Pacific Surfliner schedule between Los Angeles and San Diego. So that's our corridor. These trips will provide more options to travelers and fill gaps in the current schedule. The Pacific Surfliner, for those that don't know, remains the busiest state-supported intercity passenger rail service in the country. That's it.
Okay, thank you for that. I appreciate your service on LoSAN board. I see no other hands raised, so I would ask Anthony if we have any remaining public comments.
We do not, sir.
All right, that means that we are going to announce that our next scheduled meeting is the regular board meeting of July 22nd, 2021 at 2 p.m. And we will convene that meeting virtually again. And for now, so that means that this meeting is adjourned. Good night, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.